The next split in the road happens in World War II. This is a very important story because this is not the story I was taught in school. You tell me if what I'm about to say you were taught in school. The United States entered World War II when Japan attacked America at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii on December 7th, 1941. Up to that point, what had happened in World War II? Well, by 1940, France had been defeated by Nazi Germany. They had lost over 500,000 soldiers and civilians, and they surrendered in 1940. And in June of 1941, Nazi Germany attacked the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union was already at war with Nazi Germany when Japan attacked America on December 7th, 1941. But this gave us the opportunity to join Great Britain to oppose Germany and Italy in Europe and Japan in the Pacific. So, okay, now we're in, and between December 7th, 1941, and the point that Germany surrendered, which was May 8th of 1945, a lot happened in those 4 years. So let's get into it a little bit. In 1940, FDR was entering his third term of office, unprecedented in U.S. history. Because he had polio and his health was not good, he was already thinking, okay, I need to pick someone who could succeed me if I die while I'm in office. And he selected Henry Wallace. Henry Wallace is legendary, but you may not have heard of him. Here's one of the forks in the road. So Henry Wallace became the Vice President of the United States in 1940. This would become FDR's second vice president. The first vice president had served the first 2 terms from 32 to 1940, and Henry Wallace started in January of 41. Henry Wallace was a visionary, and his vision was to bring the New Deal to the world. And in May of 1942, we are in the war at this point against Germany, against Japan. Henry Wallace gave a speech called The Century of the Common Man. And he said many things in his speech, but the key point of the speech is he was talking about in the post-World War II world, we were going to have a peace of all time. And how we were going to do that is we were going to bring the New Deal to our friends and our enemies. Wallace named Germany. He named the Soviet Union. He named Japan. This was a vision of global unity that was intended to create a peace for all time, unlike what happened with the Treaty of Versailles. It was like Wallace was saying, we are going to learn the lesson and not sow the seeds for a third world in how we settle this war. And so this was Henry Wallace in May of 1942. So we're fighting the war. FDR has to run for re-election again in 1944. But his health is now starting to fail pretty significantly. So the power brokers in the Democratic Party decided, oh no, we can't have this Henry Wallace. How can that be possible? He's talking about bringing the New Deal to the Soviet Union. They're communists. We can't have that. We're capitalists. Communism is a threat. And so we need to get another vice president who will not bring the New Deal to the Soviet Union, who understands that the Soviet Union is our enemy, notwithstanding what they're doing in Europe to the Germans. So at the Democratic Convention, Henry Wallace was the second most popular politician in the country in 1944. Extremely popular for his vision of the world. He was going to be voted in the first night that would have had the vote. FDR's nomination had been voted in, no problem. And now it was Henry Wallace's turn. And the convention hall was on fire for Henry Wallace. And what these power brokers did was they prevented the vote by suspending activity for the day. Overnight, they started the process of twisting the arms. The next day, when the vote was counted, Henry Wallace got the most votes, but he did not get enough votes to secure the nomination. They found their guy, Harry Truman. And so they had to have another round. And in the second round, they really twisted arms. And all of a sudden, Harry Truman had leapfrogged Henry Wallace and won enough votes to get the nomination for Vice President of the United States. That's how Henry Wallace got replaced. Complete shenanigans. It's a matter of public record. So now we enter into 1945. The Germans are on the edge of surrender. Japan is on the edge of surrender. FDR calls a conference between Stalin and Churchill and him to decide how they want to bring this war to an end. What is going on here is this. The United States is demanding absolute surrender, which typically means the leaders of Germany and Japan will be executed for what they did. And the Japanese are saying, there is no way. We will fight to the last person. We're not letting you execute our emperor. So they're having a hard time getting the Japanese to agree to surrender under those terms. And so FDR makes an extraordinary request of Stalin. This is in February of 1945. And here's the split in the room. He asked Stalin, after Germany surrenders, I need you to send the Red Army to the Pacific to do in the Pacific what the Red Army has done in Europe. And we're going to go over that right now. In those 4 years, from December 7th, 1941, to when Germany surrendered in May of 1945, the United States lost 240,000 soldiers in Europe. We lost more in the Pacific, but in Europe, we lost 240,000 soldiers. The British lost 400,000. As I told you, the French lost 500,000 when they surrendered in 1940. The Germans lost about 5 million. And the Soviets lost 8.7 million Red Army soldiers. And if you include civilian deaths, the death toll was anywhere between 20 million, that's the minimum, cutting across all historians, up to 27 million. That level of sacrifice was recognized by President Kennedy in 1963 in his famous speech on peace, where he said no nation in the history of war had suffered more than the Soviet Union did in World War II. So when FDR asked Stalin to send the Red Army to the Pacific to do in the Pacific what the Red Army and the Soviet Union had done to Germany in Europe, is because 80% of the fighting was on the Eastern Front between Germany and the Soviet Union. They carried the lion's share. Yes, we armed them. We supported them, but they did most of the fighting. It's not that our 20% was insignificant, but that's all you and I heard about is the great bravery of the U.S. military and the British fighting and defeating the Nazis, when in fact, most of the effort, 80% of the fighting, look at the casualty counts, matter of public record, 80% of the fighting was on the Eastern Front. It was the fact that the Soviet Union refused to surrender that broke the back of the Nazi military machine. The same military machine that destroyed the French by 1940. Yeah, that's the level of sacrifice. And the world knew it then. So Churchill wasn't affronted that FDR did not ask the British to join us in the Pacific. No, everyone knew, including the Japanese, what the Red Army and the Soviet Union did, that they refused to surrender. And that unbelievable sacrifice, 8.7 million soldiers, up to 27 million people. So FDR's strategy to get the Japanese to surrender under the terms we wanted, absolute surrender, was that, oh, you want to fight to the last man? Okay, we're sending in the Red Army. Because if anyone is willing to fight to the last man, they are. And Stalin agreed. He said, I need 3 months. But 3 months after Germany surrenders, I will have the Red Army in the Pacific fighting against the Japanese. They make the agreement in February. FDR dies in April of 1945. And here is an Andrew Johnson moment. Because instead of executing the strategy that FDR wanted, where the Soviet Union was our greatest ally and would continue to be our greatest ally, Harry Truman came in and he protected the capitalists. He decided to drop the atomic bombs on Japan on August 6th and August 9th. Now, let me be clear. Germany surrendered on May 8th. Stalin said he needed 3 months. Like clockwork, on August 8th, 1945, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and the Red Army was in China. And over the course of August 1945, the Red Army destroyed a 1,000,000-man Japanese army in China as they were heading to Japan. Yeah, that was the Soviet Union. But instead of allowing them to do their work, which would have brought Japan to their knees, we pulled out a secret weapon that Stalin wasn't aware of, that the world wasn't aware of. And we did what no country has done since. We dropped an atomic bomb on civilian populations in Japan, killing tens of thousands. And we did it twice. Historians debate whether it was necessary. Let me be plain from an editorial perspective. The rationale for dropping the bomb was to save the number of American lives it would have taken for the American forces to have gone on the island of Japan and bring Japan to surrender. But the Red Army had already taken care of that mission. It would not have been U.S. forces going door to door on the island of Japan. The Red Army was willing to do it. This is what they did in Europe. They took the brunt of the Nazi war machine. What I'm trying to say is the impact on us is immeasurable. And the sacrifice in numbers is a matter of public record. So this is an ally who did what was necessary for us to win World War II. And instead of being grateful, instead of taking the path of equality, instead of Henry Wallace's vision of bringing the New Deal to the Soviet Union, Germany, Japan, to all our allies, bringing the world, that's lasting peace. No, we sowed the seed for the Cold War by dropping atomic bombs on Japan to send a signal to Stalin, you're next. All you have to do is look at what we did next to determine that's what that meant. Because what we did next, we then turned around and in the Marshall Plan, we rebuilt Germany Think about that. Imagine if the United States in a world war had sacrificed 8.7 million US soldiers, and our ally in that war rebuilt the enemy who killed 8.7 million Americans. How would we feel? Because this is exactly what we did to them. So you would have to ask yourself, why did the Soviet Union seize Eastern Europe and create the Warsaw Pact? Maybe it has something to do with the fact that all the wars between Europe, and I'm not talking border wars, I'm not talking about Finland and Russia, I'm talking about mainland Europe. All the wars between mainland Europe and Russia was started by Western European nations. France started the Napoleonic Wars against Russia. Germany started World War I against Russia, and Germany attacked the Soviet Union in June of 1941 in World War II. Therefore, the acts of aggression was coming from the West, not from the East. It's just factually true. So, yeah, since we weren't going to be allies, even though they defeated the greatest threat that Great Britain and the United States had ever faced was Nazi Germany. Even though they did that for us, we allied with Germany by rebuilding Germany. So, yeah, obviously, we're not friends, no matter how many Soviets were sacrificed. So, here, splitting the road. Can we bring equality to the world? The New Deal to the world? Well, the Democrats made sure that Henry Wallace wasn't vice president when FDR died in April of 1945. Because if Henry Wallace was president, he told us what he was going to do. FDR set the plan in motion. Stalin followed through and sent the Red Army to the Pacific and had destroyed a 1 million-man Japanese army in China. They would have surrendered, and we would have an entirely different post-World War II world. Let us not be confused. This is what started the Cold War. We did, by betraying the greatest ally America has ever had. You go ahead and find occasion where that national security of the United States was at greater risk than what Nazi Germany and Japan had posed during World War II. And yet we made them the enemy, the foil during the Cold War. So vitriolic was our intent to make them the enemy that we engaged in a purge of the American people in the late 1940s, early 1950s. We call it McCarthyism, Red Scare. Yeah, destroyed thousands of American lives. And why? If they had any pre-World War II association with the Soviet Union or communism, we destroyed them, including Oppenheimer, the scientist who led the Manhattan Project, who created the atom bombs that we used against Japan. Even him we destroyed. Yeah, that's how we made the Soviet Union our enemy, even though they sacrificed up to 27 million people, and we benefited from it. We don't have to speculate whether we would have defeated the Nazis if the Soviet Union had surrendered after 5 million deaths. All we have to recognize is that the magnitude of the deaths that we would have suffered and that the British would have suffered is unlike anything in either of our nations' histories. And the only reason that didn't happen is because the Soviet Union sacrificed the way they did. And they still went to the Pacific and destroyed a 1 million-man Japanese army. at the request of the President of the United States. And yet we still made him the enemy. You've reached the end of episode 41, the YouTube cut. If you've enjoyed this excerpt from the full episode, click the link below and join the Breadcrumbs community as a monthly standard member. The cost will only be $10 a month, but for your membership, you get free gifts valued at over $20, and you get all the full video episodes of Breadcrumbs. Plus, you get access to the research that I used to make these episodes. You also get a direct email access to me so we could deepen the conversation. So yeah, if you enjoyed this excerpt, click the link below, join the community, and see the rest of the episode. You take care, and I'll see you next time in the conversation.